Okay, so yeah. All right, so we'll start with the second part, lecture 6.2, which is the variants of HGD for deep learning, right? So here, this lecture, I'll have a few slides, but also talk about a few papers towards the end, just to give a sense of this. I won't spend too much time. I'll give like the high level ideas of those papers, but definitely for further reading, try to go over those papers as well, right? Are there any questions until now? Okay, so if everything is clear, then recall HGD, right? What we spoke, just what we kind of analyzed in the last part, which is basically WK plus 1 is equal to WK minus alpha K times uh, gradient of Fik, right? So the kind of meta point is that you pick Ik at random. And here Ik could either be an example or a mini batch. Okay. And by the way, one thing, like though it's clear, I think I'll just kind of emphasize it again that the mini batch variant, we compute the full gradient over the mini batch. Okay. That is, we compute the average gradient over the mini batch, and then we pick the mini batch at random, right? So the stochasticity um, comes from the mini batch, right? From the choice of the mini batch, but the mini batch itself is treated like a full gradient, right? So that's why, in some sense, mini batch HGD also is a variant of um, kind of something in between full gradient and stochastic gradient, right? So this is something to keep in mind. Um, so the idea of momentum, and this is again very similar to the momentum in the gradient descent case, is that we can actually improve upon HGD via momentum. Okay. Again, this is not really driven as much from the theoretical perspective, right? Because it's not clear whether momentum, or at least done this way, right? Whether it like kind of improves the convergence rate the way it does in the full gradient case, right? So it's not clear if it does, but from an empirical perspective, and that's why like this part is not really the theoretical part of HGD, it's more from the empirical perspective. So a lot of this is kind of empirical tricks that have been that have come up over the years, right? So momentum is an empirical trick when used in HGD, right? So what it means is that the theoretical analysis, I'm not sure if it's known whether the theoretical analysis is better or not, but at least empirically, this sometimes tends to work better, right? So the idea is similar to momentum. Similar to the gradient descent case. You compute the gradient of this kind of slightly adjusted uh, weight. So instead of doing like WK, you actually use the previous direction, which is WK minus WK minus 1, and take the gradient at that point, and then furthermore you also average, you also add this, right? So two critical parameters here are alpha k and beta k. Okay, so alpha k and beta k basically will be different versions of momentum based on this. So we'll actually take a look at this. Okay, so heavy ball momentum, so actually here there's no gamma k. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there is a gamma k, right? So this is gamma k here. Okay. So the heavy ball momentum actually uses gamma k equal to 0, right? So the heavy ball momentum, and this is similar to the heavy ball, by the way, which was done in the gradient descent case as well, right? So if you recall, in the gradient descent, we did talk about heavy ball momentum. So the heavy ball momentum takes the gradient step, right? So there is this WK, but it doesn't have this gamma k additionally here. So we're not changing this WK at all. We have this minus alpha k times this term plus beta k times wk minus 1, right? So essentially what it means is that we are partially going in the direction of the gradient. So this is the gradient direction, and this is the momentum direction, right? So we are going the momentum direction. Basically what I mean is that we are using the previous updates, right? So we are kind of using the fact that the the momentum algorithm moved a certain direction in the previous iteration, right? We are using this fact as well to kind of modify the gradient based algorithm. Okay, and it's not too hard to see that actually wk minus wk minus 1 will be nothing but minus alpha k minus 1 times f of I k minus 1 times wk minus 1, right? Plus beta k minus 1 times wk minus 1 minus wk minus 2, right? So this step is like the previous gradient, right? But this is actually the previous momentum, which in turn depends on the last to last gradient, right? So essentially what the heavy ball momentum is doing by doing this nice momentum trick, it is actually kind of implicitly using all the previous directions that it has used, like all the previous gradients that have been used so far. Implicitly, it is using them in this update, right? Is this part clear to you? Right. So this in turn depends on previous gradients. Okay, so that's the nice thing about this version of heavy ball momentum, right? And it's kind of intuitive. It's kind of adding these two separately. So there is also this version called Nestrov's accelerated gradient, which is similar to the Nestrov's method in gradient descent world, right? And there we have this gamma k and beta k, and both of these are the same, right? So this is the momentum parameter. So Nestrov's version is slightly more complicated, right? Because you additionally have this kind of heavy ball version, but you are not computing the gradient at WK, right? But you're computing the gradient at a slightly different point, which is WK plus gamma k and WK minus 1, right? So this is the key difference over here, but this is the intuition, okay? And alpha is, there are two parameters mainly for both versions of momentum. There are two parameters. One is alpha, which is the learning rate, and beta, which is the momentum parameter. Okay. Okay. So the any questions until now, by the way? Okay. So this technique is not adaptive, right? So it requires extensive tuning of the learning rate schedules. So in fact, there are two parameters now. One is momentum that needs to be tuned, and also the learning rate, right? So a lot of the push in machine learning or deep learning is to try to have algorithms that have fewer and fewer hyperparameters, right? So that you don't have to tune too many of them. They just work, off the shelf. So without the right learning rate schedule, the convergence can be slow, and also it's kind of depends a lot on the initialization, right? So that's the reason why we have this adaptive learning rate based techniques. Okay. So adaptive methods try to automatically adapt the learning rate based on the gradient. So in some sense, this is similar. I mean, I'll just draw some kind of parallel. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar to the line search ideas, right? Except that we are not doing any line search here. Line search tries to kind of tune the learning rate and kind of get the perfect learning rate, right? But we are not doing anything like that. We are actually using the previous gradient information to maybe update the learning rate over time, right? So that's the idea of adaptive methods. So it turns out that we can actually come up with a framework of algorithms for a kind of adaptive gradient based algorithms, right? And this is something that I kind of liked as a unified view of these things. So I kind of show this in a lot of my classes. Um, I'll kind of talk about first the simplest version, which is AdaGrad, right? And this is this paper by John Ducci et al. In 2011, where he kind of, kind of proposes this AdaGrad algorithm, right? So the idea of AdaGrad is that in addition to the alpha k, so basically AdaGrad is very similar to a Newton style algorithm, right? Uh, but the only caveat is that here this is a stochastic version of that. So this is not full gradient. We are not in the full gradient regime. We are in the stochastic kind of gradient regime, right? But still, can we actually compute an inverse of a Hessian or of a matrix HK? The question is that what is this matrix? Okay. So in this paper, in this AdaGrad paper, obviously one of the critical aspects is that this matrix has to be fast to compute the inverse, right? Otherwise, there's really no point in doing HGD, right? Because you really want speed. That's why you're going to HGD. So the simplest way of doing an HK is actually doing a diagonal matrix, right? So you have a diagonal matrix here, which has like, basically non-zero points. Everything else is zero. This is non-zero, right? So you have a diagonal matrix, and you basically you want this to be super fast, so you don't want any matrix inversions, right? So that's the intuition. So you have this diagonal matrix, and now you can compute the inverse of a diagonal matrix very easily, because imagine that you have a matrix which is like, say, alpha 1 alpha 2 0 0, and you compute the matrix, or say, instead of using alpha, I'll use, say, h1 0 0 h2, right? And I take the inverse of this matrix. This will be nothing but 1 over h1 0 0 1 over h2, right? So this is easy to see actually from just some simple matrix algebra, right? In fact, you can multiply both of these together and you'll see that it will come to 1, right? So so the inverse is very simple, right, of this kind of matrix. So that's the intuition. So you want to compute this matrix, and the matrix actually that you define is exactly this. So you define HK to be the diagonal version of the sum of I from 1 to k eta I times gi dot gi. So this dot is basically element wise product. Okay. So this is a vector, right? And when I say a diagonal of a vector h is nothing but equal to this matrix, which is h1, h2 until hd 0, 0. Is this clear? What we mean by diagonal of h, where h is a vector, h1 to hd, then this is a diagonal matrix, right? And here this is a vector, which is the sum of I from 1 to k. K is the current iteration, right? So this is just a running sum, by the way. So you just need to keep a running gradient sum. You don't need to store the previous gradients. You just need to keep a running sum of the gradients. And then you just do an element-wise multiplication of the gradient coordinates. Or in other words, element-wise square. You're taking an element-wise square, you're adding the element-wise square, and then you're taking the square root. Is this clear? Yeah, Nathan.
So the square root is also element-wise over the vector,
Yes.
right? And then
yes.
diagonalizing it is just putting the vector along the diagonal.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, do I?
What does the tilde stand for? Is this the tilde or?
Oh, where is the tilde?
It's in the diagonal sum of the element-wise production.
You mean this one? What is this?
No, the one the one that looks like an N.
Oh, this one.
Yes.
The eta I. Oh, I see. So
Exactly.
eta I is actually the learning rate. Okay, so maybe I'll call this alpha I. Right? Wait. So what is so eta I? Yeah, eta I is the learning rate, I believe. Yeah, eta I. So this is the learning rate, alpha I. Yeah, thank you. So the learning rate times the gradient square so far. Any other questions? Okay. So now I'll kind of talk about this unified view, right? So having spoken about AdaGrad, you understand what AdaGrad is. Now you understand the kind of definitions of these quantities, right? We can talk about this momentum version of AdaGrad. And the momentum version of AdaGrad basically is as follows. So you can kind of incorporate momentum in this AdaGrad version, right? And this becomes this very general update rule, which you can kind of write as follows. So you write wk plus 1 is equal to wk minus alpha k, right? This is the learning rate, times hk inverse of this gradient of fi of this, right? And again, hk is the way we defined it over here, right? So this is the way you define hk. And thus you have beta k times hk inverse times hk minus 1 times wk minus wk minus 1, right? So this is this generic kind of update rule now with momentum, right? And this is AdaGrad plus momentum. So this is this unified equation for AdaGrad, which is adaptive basically, plus momentum. So it turns out that you can actually view many of the algorithms in this light, right? So you can view now. So actually, maybe I might be slightly wrong here. That I think the eta I is not necessarily the learning rate, but I think this is another hyperparameter. So I'll just double check exactly what eta I is. I don't remember now. I'll just double check from the AdaGrad paper. In fact, we'll see AdaGrad paper towards the end, so I'll confirm. So I'm not sure if this is the learning rate or this is an additional parameter, right? So I'll just leave this as a question mark, which I'll answer that. Yeah, so GI, okay, so there's a question of GI. So GI is the gradients, is the stochastic gradients, okay? So at every iteration, we are getting the gradients, right? So what I'm doing here is that I'm just keeping the gradient sum, the element-wise gradient dot product and the sum, okay? Is this clear? Yeah, okay. So we define now GK. Okay, so this is some matrix notation. You can probably ignore this. GK is like HK dot HK. Again, this is element-wise multiplication. So basically, GK is nothing but this one, right? Which is like diagonal of sum of I from 1 to k eta I times GI dot GI. Right, so this is what GK is, and DK is this kind of individual diagonal of GK dot GK. Okay. Okay, so basically, any questions that you know on this notation? So essentially, right, GK is nothing but the sum of I from 1 to k of DI. Okay, and HK is okay. So I think HK is not that trivial to write, but it's something like a square root. So the element-wise square root, right? So it's like GK, the square root of this, where this is element-wise. Okay, so this is the connection between like GK, DK, and HK. Okay, but given this now, we can actually come up with the updates for everything, right? So there are three essential parameters here. One is this GK quantity, right? One is the alpha K, beta K, and gamma, right? So how do you set this? So in the case of AdaGrad, GK is nothing but GK minus 1 plus DK. Okay, and okay, so maybe before coming to the adaptive algorithms, you can actually view SGD and the different momentum algorithms as like simple examples of this, where GK is just identity, right? So alpha here is alpha, the learning rate. In the in the heavy ball momentum, beta is basically alpha and beta are there over here. In the Nestros one, there is alpha, beta, and beta, right? So this is the three variants over here. And in the case of AdaGrad, you don't have any momentum, so it's just this and alpha. In RMS prop also there is no momentum, just that the GK is actually set in a slightly more kind of complicated way. Okay, so there's an additional parameter here which is like beta. Okay, so actually this answers my question. So I was a little bit kind of confused about this quantity eta I, right? So eta I is this more general quantity here. In the case of Adagrad, actually beta I is equal to 1, right? So in the case of Adagrad, you don't have this eta I. So in Adagrad, eta I is equal to 1, right? But in the case of like say RMS prop, you actually have this eta I, right? So eta I is a parameter called beta 2, which is an additional parameter uh, kind of corresponding to the momentum, something like the momentum, but it's not really a momentum, right? So RMS prop, for example, has the learning rate alpha, but it also has this beta over here, right? Which defines this adaptiveness. So this is RMS prop, and ADAM is a slightly more kind of complicated algorithm where you have like two more parameters. So you have alpha, but you also have beta 1 and you have beta 2, right? And you kind of set this in this more convoluted way. So you set basically gk to be like beta 2 divided by 1 minus beta 2 raised to k multiplied by gk minus 1 plus 1 minus beta 2 over 1 minus beta 2 raised to k into dk. Okay, and then you set the learning rate appropriately here and the beta parameter appropriately. Gamma is 0 in the case of ADAM, right? So ADAM is a version of heavy ball momentum, but this three set in this way. Any questions until now on this? Why is this called adaptive? So it is called adaptive because even though the base alpha is set to be constant, right? Essentially, what's going on is that you are actually multiplying this. The actual learning rate is actually this quantity, right? Which is alpha times hk minus 1, right? So so this is changing as the iterations progress. Another key difference over here is that the learning rate is per coordinate. So there is this per coordinate learning rate. Right, which is this interesting kind of connection here. So you don't have just one number which is a learning rate, but now you have a learning rate that gets multiplied to every coordinate of your gradient. So basically there are two reasons, two differences, right? One is that this effective learning rate is changing over time, right? And secondly, this learning rate is applied per coordinate. Okay. Was there any other questions? Luai, did you have a question?
Well, it was not necessarily a question, but I had the impression that the Adagrad was the adaptive learning rate, where the learning rate keeps changing. But you pointed to that, and this is honestly new to me, where it's not directly to the learning rate, but it is an adaptive learning rate.
Yeah. So that is what is going on here in these different algorithms, right? And I think I kind of like this unified view because now you can think about this. Essentially, you can kind of understand the expressions, the math going on behind these, right? I'm sure most of you who do deep learning use one of these algorithms in some form, right? So I think you kind of understand now what's going on really kind of underneath these. Okay. So there's this also kind of this nice intuition of ADAM, which I talked briefly about. So ADAM is basically heavy ball momentum plus adaptive, right? So essentially MK and VK here, I'm defining two quantities. MK and VK are essentially kind of updates over the gradients and the gradient square, right? So VK is like estimates of the first moment or the mean of the gradients and second moment, which is like the variance of the gradients, right? And essentially, the way ADAM proceeds is by maintaining these two quantities, which is MK and VK. Okay, so you update MK as beta 1 times MK minus 1 plus 1 minus beta 1 times GK, right? And you update VK as beta 2 times VK minus 1 plus 1 minus beta 2 times GK, or GK, right? So essentially, beta 1 is this parameter that smooths out between the the new versus the previous gradients, right? And so essentially beta 1 is like the gradient one, gradient hyperparameter, and beta 2 is this gradient square hyperparameter, right? So both MK and VK are initialized to 0. And essentially, as you update this, you would be so essentially, since these are initialized to 0, right? What's going on is that both of these are like running averages of the previous gradients, right? But they are just being multiplied by beta 1 or like 1 minus beta 1 appropriately, right? So so the basic idea is that when the learning rates are when the decay rates are small, right, they kind of go very closely towards 0. So both of these, since this is like a running sum, eventually what will happen is that this will go towards 0, right? So to kind of counter this, we divide by 1 minus beta 1 raised to k and 1 minus beta 2 raised to k, right? So that's why you have this very complicated expression here where you divide by 1 minus beta 1 raised to k and you divide by 1 minus beta 2 raised to k here, right? So sorry, so here there is 1 minus beta 2 raised to k in this gradient square term, and there is a 1 minus beta 1 raised to k in these two. Okay? But basically that's what's going on. So you have the moment, you have the mean or the gradients, and then you have this vk, right? And then the Adam update is basically this, which is wk plus 1 is equal to wk minus alpha k times mk hat multiplied by element wise multiplied by vk hat inverse square. Again, this is element wise. Okay, so this is element wise. Okay, and in practice, people just use kind of these as default parameters. Somehow magically, the deep learning community has kind of converged to these parameters of beta 1 and beta 2, which is beta 1 is equal to 0.9 and beta 2 is equal to 0.999. Okay? So that's somehow kind of just some magic there, but it just turns out to work pretty well in practice. And it's kind of not too sensitive that like Adam is not too sensitive to these hyperparameters. So we just like sorry. We just continue using this in practice. Yeah. What happened to 0.99? What do you mean? Oh, so like why is it not? Yeah, so that's a good question, right? I think somehow maybe just 0.999 works slightly better than 0.9. So I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what is the reasoning or the history behind these two terms. I think the original Adam paper, if I'm not wrong, actually set these two terms, right? And they did like extensive kind of experiments with this thing. Is Adam basically a combination of this? Basically, I think you are right. So I think I think it's like more similar to RMS prop instead of Adagrad. So it's like RMS prop plus momentum. You're basically right. Just that Adam has this original kind. I mean, it has an extra kind of normalization with like 1 minus beta raised to k, right? So it has the extra normalization. But apart from that, you're basically right that this is essentially like RMS prop. Okay, and there are actually tons of algorithms. In fact, every year there are like 2-3 of these that come up. I'm probably outdated a little bit, so there are like 1 or 2 more recent versions that have come up in the last like year or so, which kind of tend to improve over Adam. But still, having said that, I mean, the deep learning community still uses Adam, I think, most predominantly, or SGD. Either they use Adam or SGD, right? So none of the other ones are really used. But because I think Adagrad was one of the first that came up with this, I think Adagrad is this other, in my view, one of the most influential papers in the last like 10-15 years, right? Because it kind of really spawned a lot of this adaptive algorithm thinking. But Adagrad, having said that, Adagrad is not really something that is used in practice as much. People either use Adam or they just use SGD in practice. Okay, but still I'll just mention there is AdamMax, which is an extension of Adam with the L infinity norm. There is N-Adam, which is Nestro's momentum instead of heavy ball momentum to adaptive. In fact, I think it's like RMS prop, right? So it's like RMS prop plus Nestro. AdaDelta is an extension of RMS prop that uses RMS operator on the weight difference. Then there is AMS grad, which fixes a theoretical error in Adam, right? So this is a kind of an interesting paper by Reddy et al. In 2018. Again, this is kind of a more technical issue. There was a bug in the proof, it turns out, in Adam. They changed the algorithm slightly, but having said that, still I think Adam is the algorithm that people use in practice, even after this bug. But it's worth mentioning that these authors actually kind of did identify this bug in this proof of Adam, and basically AMS grad kind of fixes it, right? So it turns out that Adam actually may not really converge even for convex functions, right? So even though it's this is where there's a gap, between theory and practice. That Adam is really an algorithm that people use a lot in practice, but there's a fundamental issue in Adam that it may not even converge for convex functions, right? So the kind of major novelty in AMS grad was just ensuring that these VTs remain positive, right? And that actually tends to fix this this algorithm. But again, this is also a nice paper you can go over, 2018 paper. Okay. There's also a nice blog over here which maybe we can take a quick look at, which is basically optimizing gradient descent. The kind of, again, it compares all of these different algorithms. Okay. So maybe I'll skip this in the interest of time. Adagrad shows a convergence bound, which is like actually a regret bound. We'll maybe quickly look at the Adagrad paper actually after this. And then there are several other deep learning papers that that talk about this theoretical results and so on and so forth. So I think there are a lot of kind of theoretical bounds. The theoretical bounds are what are known as regret bounds actually. So it's slightly different from the convergence proof that we have seen, but you can still show these kind of bounds for this problems. Okay. All right. So it turns out that Adagrad does not work as well in practice, right? So we'll actually see this, a little bit. So this is actually some plots from the Adam paper, right? And here you can see that actually amongst the different adaptive methods, Adam tends to perform the best, right, because of momentum. And this they actually found across several different data sets. So this is just MNIST, but actually they looked at CIFAR 10, CIFAR 100. I think they also looked at a few different NLP data sets for NLP kind of problems. Across the board, they found that Adam really performs well, right? So maybe I'll just talk a little bit about this kind of differences between adaptive and non-adaptive techniques. Okay. So the benefit of Adagrad is that Adagrad can actually significantly improve upon SGD, particularly in sparse feature sets, right? And one of the main two reasons for this is that it automatically sets the learning rate, right? And secondly, it actually kind of updates the learning rate with a decay schedule, right? But more often, one more important difference is that it has a per coordinate learning rates, right? So imagine you have very sparse data points, right? Now, if you have some sparse data points, certain features appear very frequently, right? So what I mean by sparse, maybe I'll just explain this a little bit. So what I mean by sparse is that imagine you have your data comprising of like millions of coordinates, right? Right, but one critical difference is that most of these, for any given data point, most of these are zero. Okay, you have a few that are non-zero. Everything else is zero. So imagine that you have, like, for example, a bag of words like model, right? Or maybe your text corpus has millions of words, right? But in a particular document or a particular sentence, only a few hundreds of words may appear, right? Or maybe tens of words in a sentence, or maybe hundreds of words, or to maybe 1,000 words in a document, right? So if I'm representing each document through a bag of words representation, this is going to be extremely sparse, right? So most of them will be non-zero, and sorry, most of them will be zero, and a few of them will be non-zero, right? The question is, how to deal in these scenarios where you have millions of coordinates that are sparse, right? So the problem with HGD or a gradient descent like algorithm is that it is essentially weighing each coordinate equally, right? Now imagine that there are a few words that are very common in your set of documents, right? But there are a lot of words that are actually extremely uncommon that appear only once or twice. So essentially you are actually updating the common words in the same way or in the same rate that you're updating the uncommon words, right? Which is not good. So imagine that you have a kind of a decreasing learning rate, right? Maybe there is a word that appears towards the, when the learning rate is very small, and that appears at the first time, right? So because that word appears the first time, the model will not really learn much about this, right? So imagine that there's a sparse word or there's a rare word, right? That appears first time when the learning rate is small, because you're decaying the learning rate, right? So then what will happen is that the rare word will not actually be learned in this model as well as what it should have been learned if the learning rate was large, right? And the main reason is that we are being unfair over here because some words appear a lot and they get learned very well, but some words don't appear much at all. So the intuition of this, the per coordinate learning rate, is that every coordinate can get learned in its own speed, right? So if a particular coordinate, if a particular word appears very late, because it's a per coordinate learning rate, right? I know that this learning rate should get this coordinate now should be updated with a high learning rate, right? So that's the intuition that AdaGrad kind of ensures through its scheme. Okay, but in contrast, it turns out that in dense settings, actually where you have dense features, AdaGrad works very poorly, right? And this is very common in deep models. And a main reason for this is that there's a rapid decay in the learning rates. Okay, so a lot of the future techniques that have come out actually tend to all fix this issue from an empirical perspective. All right. So does AdaGrad have a decay constant? So AdaGrad does not have an explicit decay constant, but it does have an kind of implicit decay constant from the fact that it is multiplying this with this HK inverse, right? So there's this HK inverse that is being multiplied here in AdaGrad, right? And this is what kind of sets the decay, right? So alpha is constant if you see in AdaGrad, right? Alpha is fixed, but just the fact that you have this gradient sum ensures that you're doing a decay, right? Does that answer your question? Yeah, and this is the intuition, right? Because if a coordinate does not happen, if suppose the coordinate does not appear, its gradient does not get updated, right? So because you're kind of adding the gradients and you're taking an inverse over here, what's happening is that as you see more and more of a particular feature, that gradient will be larger and larger, right? And because the gradient will be larger and larger, you will actually kind of downweigh this. So there's a natural decay that is happening, right? But this decay is happening only if the gradient for that particular feature has been seen. If there is a rare word which has not been seen so far, right, that gradient will not be updated. So essentially the gradient, for example, at that point will just be the indicator. If you start like GK to be the indicator, right, then it's like you're applying a larger learning rate over there and you're not decaying it the first time. Is this clear to everyone? Yeah, okay. Okay, so this is this nice property of kind of the adaptive versions, right? And also one more observation is that the momentum actually generally improves the non-momentum variance, right? But there has been a kind of auxiliary line of study that people have been coming back to HGD because HGD tends to kind of improve upon generalization, right? So this is something that we kind of spoke about last, in the first part as well. that in machine learning, we just don't care about the training loss, right? We care about generalization as well. And there's been a lot of recent work that has shown that that actually, in some sense, what's going on is that AdaGrad and Adam-based approaches, right, tend to actually get solutions which are more complicated. Okay, so though adaptive methods tend to minimize the training loss better, they do so by kind of obtaining more complex and less generalizable solutions. Okay, so this is a slightly hand-wavy statement, but I think this is the main takeaway of this set of papers that people have been finding recently. So they in fact gave a few synthetic examples where particularly in the over parameterized scenario, and they found that SGD and its variants actually obtained less complex solutions, but the adaptive versions obtain solutions which do not generalize well. So this is a slightly more contrived scenario, but it still gives some intuition as to why sometimes SGD based methods perform better on the test error as compared to AdaGrad and Adam, right? So we'll actually quickly look at this paper also towards the end. So in fact, this is the result that they showed, right? So they found that Adam by default does not perform well at all. They actually use a slight variation of Adam, but on a test error, right, the test loss, they found that from a generalization perspective, just doing SGD and momentum perform much better than the heavy ball versions. So what does less complex mean here? Yeah, so less complex, what less complex means is essentially in their example, right? So essentially complexity can be seen from a perspective of, from a regularization perspective as well, right? So this is something we saw in machine learning, that if you're given a data set, right, and particularly if you have less data, and if you have a very complicated model, like think about linear regression, or maybe think about like a regression problem where you compare with linear regression versus polynomial regression, right? And in the polynomial regression scenario, you are actually having a lot of features. So they look at this from a setting of an over parameterized scenario, right, where you have more parameters than data points, right? And in this setting, you can actually, your model can exactly minimize the training loss, but it can do it at the cost. It can do it by actually getting a point which is very specialized to the training one, right? And it is more complex in the sense, for example, that the L2 norm of that loss can be high. Oh, sorry, the L2 norm of that parameter can be large, right? So in some sense, you can think of it that SGD implicitly regularizes the problem, right? And there's been another set of work, which also maybe I'll actually show you quickly, which talks about like this implicit regularization of SGD, right? So SGD turns out to kind of implicitly regularize the problem and thereby obtain these kind of simple solutions. Yeah. So it's not that it prefers low value of regularization. Hyperparameters is not related to hyperparameters at all. It's that SGD implicitly obtains solutions that can be thought of as to be regularized, right? That are like less complex. Okay. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. So we'll take a quick look at some of these papers. So this is some additional reading which you can go over as well. This is a nice paper by Wilson et al. This is this paper by Sashank Reddy. This is the original Adam paper. This is the John Ducci et al. Paper on AdaGrad, right? So this is the AdaGrad paper, right? And this is AdaDelta, and so on and so forth, right? Also, this is a nice blog which you can take a look at as well. Okay, so maybe we have some time, so let me try to pull across some papers which are relevant. So just give me 1 minute. Okay. Yeah. Are there any questions, by the way, until now? Yeah. Okay. So um, I'll just skim through these papers very quickly so that you can get the main idea here, right? So this is this paper from 2017. It's a NIPS. It's basically from NIPS 2017, right? And the claim of the paper is as follows, as I said, right? So it's looking at the adaptive gradient methods and it's understanding what are potential issues with adaptive gradient methods, right? So this is the formulation that we saw over here, right? Um, and this is basically the setting with different values of basically Adagrad, RMS prop, Adam, etc., right? Now, maybe I'll quickly. So they look at a simple linear regression setting, right? But they look at it in a setting where this matrix X is actually this n cross D, right? And they assume that D is much larger than n, right? So what this means is that there are many minimizers. There are actually infinite number of global minimizers, right? But the question is that which global minimizer does Adagrad choose versus say, or maybe what Adam chooses versus what say SGD will choose, right? So they argue that the adaptive methods choose like more complex minimizers, and it may not be as good from a generalization perspective, right? So the question is that uh, how well do these different minimizers perform on the unseen data, right? So it turns out that they argue that WSGD is exactly this solution, right? Which is like the minimum norm solution, right? So they argue that this is equivalent to to finding the minimum norm solution, right? Which has the largest margin. Okay, but the adaptive versions actually get like this weird solution, which is proportional to so maybe yeah. So they obtain the solution which is proportional to the sign of X transpose Y. Okay. And this one they argue that so here then they actually give an example of a data set concretely where by choosing the adaptive method, the solution of the adaptive method, they actually perform worse than what they can by SGD, right? So again, I mean there's a lot of math over here. We can kind of skip through this, but they show that actually SGD can make no errors for a certain configuration of like n plus or n minus, right? But actually Adagrad or like Adam or Adagrad will actually label all unseen data points as positive in this case. Yeah, Luai.
So I'm just wondering, why would the Adagrad overfit?
Mm-hmm. So the reason why Adagrad overfits is because it is kind of setting these learning rate or is kind of setting this learning rate in a very specific way, right? Whereas SGD is doing it in almost an unbiased manner. Okay, so Adagrad, the whole regime of Adagrad is designed to actually minimize the training loss, right? So it might do better in minimizing the training loss, but we don't always care about the training loss, right? So while minimizing the training loss, it actually is very specialized by using this very specific way of defining the gradients, right? And decreasing the learning rate in that manner, right? So what this means is that you can actually come up with a schedule and like you can come up with a set of data points appropriately, so that what happens is that Adagrad will actually kind of very quickly reduce its learning rate and like come to a point which is not that nice compared to what SGD will do, right? Because SGD does not have any prior information, it just takes the average across the set of points and tries to optimize it, right? It turns out to implicitly regularize it. And in fact, there's actually been a lot of future work on this direction, kind of lot of work building upon this, where they study this notion of implicit regularization of SGD, right? So it's really the fact that because there is this very specialized way Adagrad or Adam or these algorithms are doing it, right? That you can come up with contrived scenarios where they perform worse. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Professor.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Okay. They also show this on several data sets. I'll probably skip this. You can take a look at this offline as well. Okay. So I just want to give the main idea of this paper. There's actually a very interesting ICRR 2021 paper. So it's like this year. It's like I won't talk too much about it, but this is one of the few papers that actually talks about just applying vanilla gradient descent on neural networks, right? And what happens there. So they show this interesting pattern that essentially they demonstrate that this full gradient descent kind of operates in a regime what they call the edge of stability, right? And essentially in this regime, the maximum eigenvalue of the training loss of the Hessian hovers around this 2 over step size, right? So so basically kind of gradient descent has this weird stability kind of issue with kind of the kind of standard gradient descent compared to what HGD has. Okay, and they try to reason about this on several data sets, and maybe you can take a look at this paper to also understand this. I think this is also kind of a nice read where they connect this stability to this learning rate, right? And they kind of connect the stability to the maximum eigenvalue of the Hessian. Right? So essentially, more the eigenvalue of the Hessian, the more the kind of unstable the gradients are, and it becomes harder to optimize. Right? So this partly explains some of the issues with doing gradient descent in neural networks, right? And why stochastic gradient descents are kind of is a much preferred choice over this. Okay. I also wanted to show very briefly one more paper, which is like building upon Adam, Adagrad, etc. So this is like a kind of paper on the setting of the learning rate schedules, right, and kind of the adaptivity. And they basically talk about adaptive scheduling of stochastic gradients, right? And then they try to get the best of both worlds by doing something like stochastic gradients, but adaptively setting the learning rate, kind of adaptively scheduling the learning rate. Okay. So again, this is another paper which again maybe I'll point to in the slides towards the end as well for you to take a look at. Right? But this is another paper. If like any of you are interested in doing further readings on this, please take a look. Okay. So this is the original Adagrad paper again, right? So this is a paper by John Ducci, Elad Hazan, and Yoram Singer. And this paper introduces the original Adagrad, right? So this is what we basically saw over here, and they analyze the Adagrad algorithm. They look at, again, this is slightly more theoretical, so I'm just skimming through this paper very quickly, but I wanted to show you something. So I'll skip a lot of these, but I wanted to show you the flavor of the bounds that they have, just very quickly. Let me see if I can find it. Just a minute. So again, this paper is a little bit more theoretical, so it's okay even if you don't, unless you're doing some research in this area. I wouldn't get too deep into this immediately right now, just to get a high level intuition of what's going on. So yeah, so here, for example, if you see, right, some of these, okay, so maybe this is the theorem where they talk about, yeah, so this bound is a regret bound, right? So here, so the way we derive convergence bounds, right? Here they are defining a slightly different quantity called a regret bound, which is essentially when you're talking about an online algorithm, they are trying to see how their online algorithm performs to a fixed offline algorithm, right? So the base over here is the best solution that you can obtain from an offline or a fixed algorithm, right? Where you have access to all the data points upfront, right? And you can come up with this theta t So maybe I'll define this regret bound quickly over here. Just give me 1 minute. Okay, so the regret bound is also called RT. Essentially, it takes a difference of the following. So it takes a difference from I from 1 to capital T of like f of xt, right? Xt is the solution that it obtains at time x at time t, right? Minus f of x star, right? Where f of x star is equal to the sum of I from 1. Sorry, so this is basically equal to min of x, sum of I from 1 to capital T, f of fi of x. I'll put it this way, right? So maybe there's a fi over here. Okay, so fi is the ith data point. So is this clear to everyone, by the way? So maybe I'll explain. So this is slightly different. It's related to the convergence bound, but it's slightly different. What regret bound is saying is that any of these algorithms like SGD or ADAM or like anything like that, right? Think of these as like streaming algorithms where you are basically getting data points in a stream, right? And in a stream, you're trying to basically, given that the data you have so far, you are trying to come up with the next estimate of xt, right? So maybe this is xi actually, sorry, right? So I'm comparing now, what I'm doing basically is that I'm comparing the fi of xi to this fi of x star. And x star is the offline minima, right? So if the entire data set, I can minimize this, and essentially I will get, this x star, right? And I want to compare this to each of my solutions, and I want to see how much this is bounded. So for example, you can show that the regret bound can also be bounded by say 1 over square root t, right? Or 1 over t. So again, the bound is very similar to the convergence analysis, convergence bounds, but the idea is slightly different here. Regret bounds are really meant for online algorithms, and for most of these algorithms, that's what is used to show, right? So, for example, over here, this bound, they try to give a bound on the regret, right? And then I think eventually they actually give the bounds on those specialized algorithms, right? And then they will talk about that. Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, as you can see, this paper is pretty dense, but still, I think it would be a good read if you're interested to learn more about what's going on. Okay. Any questions on this? This is the Adam paper. So the Adam paper also is a nice kind of piece of work. Again, this paper, this is the ICLR or iClear paper from 2015. And here, as you see, right, there are two parameters, beta 1 and beta 2. And then the MT here is this first moment estimates of the gradients. VT is the second kind of moment, estimates on the GT square. And then they have this kind of normalization, which is for bias correction on this. And then this is the update. Right? They have this additional epsilon over here to make sure that, basically there are no numerical stability issues, right? But otherwise, and this is the parameters that they set. So good default parameters which they give is alpha equal to 0.001, beta 1 equal to 0.9, 0.09, 0.999, right? So pretty much they say that you don't have to do too much kind of tuning, but still for certain problems you still have to do tuning, right? But for most of the problems they found that this is pretty decent. Okay, so this is Adam, right? Maybe, yeah, so there was one more which I thought we can talk about. Yeah, this is the SAG paper, and this is the paper which again talks about like the finite difference case, and kind of is this trade-off between fixed gradient and stochastic gradient, right? And it improves the convergence rate for smooth cases. So in fact, even for the smooth case, it improves from 1 over square root k to 1 over k, right? And in the strongly convex case, it gets a linear convergence rate of 1 over of rho raised to k. Okay. So, all right. Any questions on this so far? I think with this we will actually end the continuous optimization part. So next lecture we'll actually start with submodel optimization. Okay, and I think many of you will find that section also kind of interesting, and we'll actually study different algorithms in those settings and different applications. Okay, any questions until now on the first part? Anything that you'd like me to spend some time on? So I know that Geoshow, you sent me some questions to discuss. So maybe we can discuss those as well, or if there's anything specific that like anyone else has on any of the content we have seen so far in the last few lectures. Let's spend some time on that. So we have some time, 15 minutes, so we can talk about that. Is it okay? So let's see. So Geoshow, you had some specific questions, right? Do you want to ask those? We can maybe discuss that a little bit. So if I recall right, one of your question was okay. So confusion with quasi-convex and convex. Okay, so I think this is from the first class. All right. So a convex function, right? So we kind of saw this relationship between convex functions and convex sets, right? So convex functions essentially have this property that you take any 2 points, right? And essentially this is a function f. You take points x1 and x2, and you draw the line from x1 to x2, right? This line always lies above the convex function, right? So this is literally the definition of convex functions. The property of convex functions. So convex functions are related to convex sets, right? In that you can define a set C to be the set of all points x such that f of x is less than equal to, so C alpha is less than equal to alpha, right? And this, as we saw, is a convex set. Okay, some feel that they are no. So convex is a subset of quasi-convex, right? So I'll exactly explain that. So for a convex function, so given a convex function, you can define this convex set, which is C alpha of f, and this is a convex set, right? So the theorem here is that if f is convex, then C alpha f is a convex set for all alpha. Okay, but now quasi-convex functions or quasi-convex functions are functions. So the function g is quasi-convex, right? If the sublevel set, so the alpha sublevel set, right, which is basically C alpha g, is convex, right? So in some sense, this means that you are defining a convex set from a function, right? So essentially, any function. So basically, this implies that if C alpha g is equal to x such that g of x is less than equal to alpha is convex, then g is quasi-convex, right? So what this immediately implies is that if f is convex, right, it is also quasi-convex. Right, so this is a critical result which shows a relationship between the two, right? But the converse is not true. So you can have some quasi-convex functions which are not convex, right? And the reason is that this result is not if and only if, it's only one direction. So from convex sets you can go to, so from convex functions you can go to convex sets, but you can't go from convex sets to convex functions. Okay, so that's the reason why you can have some quasi-convex functions which are not convex, right? So essentially what it means is that you have a set of convex functions, right? And you have a larger set of functions that are quasi-convex. So convex functions are a subset of quasi-convex. Okay. Does it answer your question? Okay, awesome. So can you please give some practical advice on which optimization technique to use in terms of deep learning? Like, should we favor more on SGD plus Nesterov or Adam? Is there a default? So the default choice typically people use is either SGD or Adam, but what I've seen is, and this is actually oftentimes done in deep learning if you have a new data set, right? It's definitely critical to do hyperparameter tunings, because the fact that you have so many different optimization algorithms means that there is no clear winner always, right? It's not that you can say that all the other optimization algorithms are like obsolete. They all will not perform well in practice. That's not true. You can come up with many scenarios where actually Adam performs better than HGD, right? And vice versa, right? So it's not really as critical, in terms of what these different optimizers are. There'll be some difference between them, but it is more important to kind of run a um, hyperparameter optimization setup where you actually kind of have your optimization algorithm as an hyperparameter itself, right? Of course, this would give like a very large set of possible candidates, right? So that's what is actually done in industry today, right? So in industry, when you deploy deep models, they do a very rich hyperparameter tuning run, right? And I mean, in industry, you don't care, right? Because you can spin off like 1,000 GPU, cluster of 1,000 GPUs, and then you will run it, right? And you will get the result. But in academia, is something you need to care about because you don't have that many resources, oftentimes. So you need to be a little bit more careful in academia. But right. But having said that, I think you are probably going to be good enough. You're probably going to be okay if you use either Adam or HGD, right? And the only advantage of Adam is that it's got slightly lesser number of hyperparameters. The default parameters work pretty well in practice most of the times, right? So if I would start with one algorithm, I would do Adam actually in at least the deep learning regime. Okay. So can you give us a quick high-level explanation of strong convexity, Lipschitz continuity, and smoothness? Okay. So maybe what I can do is I can quickly pull up the slide that was talking about it, because that will be, so I think if I remember right, does anyone remember which lecture it was? Was it lecture 2.1 or lecture 2.2? Thank you. So yeah, so we spoke about a lot of this, right? So let's see the definitions of these terms. We'll go over it. So this is I think a very long lecture, but yeah. So if you see here, right? So essentially the basic definition of Lipschitz continuity is this, right? Which is f of x minus f of y is equal to L times x minus y, right? So the intuition is that we don't want the function to kind of grow much faster than what a linear function grows, right? So you have x minus y as the difference between them. The difference between x, like f of x and f of y itself, is bounded by L times this. Okay. So in other words, this is equivalent to saying that the gradient of f of x is bounded by L. Right. So this is the easiest way to think about Lipschitz continuity. That for any x that you care about, right? If it's Lipschitz continuous, then the gradient is bounded by L. Okay. So this is what we said, right? So the subgradient is bounded by L. Okay. And now the smooth function case is that the gradient is Lipschitz continuous, right? So the way to think about smooth functions is that the Hessian square, right? Sorry, the Hessian, not Hessian square. I mean the gradient square or the Hessian is upper bounded by Li in the positive semi-definite sense, right? So what it means is that the difference between them is negative semi-definite. Okay. So another way to write this is that you have a quadratic lower bound. So you have a quadratic upper bound of f everywhere that depends on L. Okay, so this is a quadratic kind of upper bound on L. Okay, so the intuition here with smoothness is that you kind of have a upper bound on the second derivative, right? So smoothness says that the rate of change, the derivative does not change too much. Okay, so you don't have sudden changes in the derivative, which means that the second derivative is bounded. Okay, Lipschitz continuity says is that the function itself does not change too much, right? So the gradient is bounded, that is Lipschitz continuity, and the Hessian is bounded, or the second derivative is bounded, is what is smoothness. Okay, and strong convexity is essentially saying that the function is at least quadratic, so it is growing at least quadratic, so it is quadratic plus some other function which is convex. Okay, so that is kind of that is strong convexity. Okay, so Luai, does that answer your question on the difference between these three at a high level?
Yes, Professor. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, awesome. So that's a few more questions. If f is convex, then there won't be any generalization issues, right? So it's partially right, but it's not exactly right, because even if f is convex, you could still have a highly over-parameterized scenario. So think about regression, right, where you have polynomial features. Okay, so if you have polynomial features, then you basically can have this scenario where you have, like, a lot of dimensionalities, right? So this is something which we study in machine learning, right? So maybe I'll just talk about this towards the end. So we kind of speak about this in machine learning. So imagine that you have a set of points over here, right, in linear regression. Maybe you can fit this with a crazy polynomial function, right, which is like a 9-degree polynomial, right? And this is still like this will minimize the training loss. It is still convex, but it will be very poor from a generalization perspective, right? Accelerated SGD and HGD. So actually, I'm not clear about your question. What do you mean by comparing against accelerated SGD versus HGD? So from a generalization perspective, there would still be issues, basically, like even if the function is convex, right? So we want generalization even if we have convexity. Is this your question, or did I misunderstand your question? Okay. All right. So what setting was proximal gradient descent introduced? Oh, I see. Okay. So let us kind of quickly pull up the proximal gradient descent. So which lecture was that actually? Can folks remember? Okay, so line. Okay. So I'll come to your question on line search. Do you guys remember?
In 3.2 or 4.1, I think. So I'm not so sure.
So this seems to be like Newton's methods. So I think it might have been 4.1. Yeah. So this is proximal gradient, I think, right? So let's see, or maybe it might be 3.
It's 3.2. I think it's.
Yeah, 3.2. Okay. Yeah. So proximal gradient descent was introduced mainly in the setting where we are looking at we are looking at smooth plus so basically a simple function plus a smooth function, right? So essentially, so maybe we'll yeah. So this is a setting, right? So h is a non-differentiable function which is simple. Okay, and f is a convex function which is smooth. Okay, so now the intuition here is that you can compute the prox operator of this, which is basically a prox operator, right? So this is the prox operator. So you want to be able to compute this argmin of this step, which is x minus xt square plus h of x in closed form, right? So you have a quadratic function, which is this basically x minus z the whole square plus h of z, right? And you minimize this quadratic function. If this can be done in closed form, right, then proximal is the way to go, right? Because proximal gradient descent will give this nice 1 over t or like much faster convergence, even if h is not smooth, right? Even if h is non-differentiable, in fact, right?
So if
So does it answer your question?
if HT is like a problem, but you can calculate this prox operator, then typically this proximal gradient descent then would give you a good convergence result whenever you really
Yes.
don't have too many other options. Is that the?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, because gradient descent would be much worse in this, right? So at no additional cost of gradient descent, you just change the update of gradient by adding this prox, right? And at like hardly any additional cost, you can get this much faster convergence. So proximal is the way to go in those settings. Right? So there's a question on line search. So what was your specific question on line search actually, Abhijit? Do you have a specific question, or would you want to go over the? Just a quick overview. Okay, so we are just running a little bit out of time, but maybe I'll spend a couple of minutes on this again, right? So the basic insight of line search is that we don't know what this ideal parameter is, right? Like 1 over L or whatever we are setting it to. So the whole idea of line search is that can we do this in an iterative manner where we kind of reduce this learning rate iteratively in this line search loop, right? So this is the Armijo condition, right? So the Armijo condition is we want to do f of w minus alpha times g should be less than equal to f of w minus this parameter, right? So we want to decrease, so we want to choose this alpha so that we have a decrease which is at least alpha times gradient square multiplied with this parameter gamma. Okay, so this is again like a hyperparameter, but you can set it to be like some constant, like say 1 minus 4 or something, right? But you just keep dividing the learning rate by half or like just some interpolation scheme or something, right? But the basic insight is that you want to achieve this criteria. So you start with some value of alpha, and typically the alpha will be too big, right? So if alpha is too big, then this may not be satisfied. So what it means that you need to keep reducing the alpha so that you have a small enough kind of step, right? So that you are decreasing the learning rate. Does it make sense? So think of a function like this, right? Imagine that you are somewhere over here. Yeah, so g is the gradient, exactly. So g is the gradient, right? Now imagine that you're going in this direction, but if you have a large alpha, you can actually increase this, right? So if you start with say alpha equal to 1, you can actually kind of diverge, right? So the whole point is that you want to get this small enough alpha so that you have enough decrease. Okay, so you see that this is big enough, you actually reduce the alpha by half, right? So you get alpha, you get it over here. Okay, and then maybe this also increases a little bit, right? And then you get it over here. So you choose the right value of alpha so that you at least have this much decrease, right? And then once you have this alpha, you can actually go. So that's the main insight with the backtracking line search. Okay, awesome. Are there any other questions? Did I miss any other question? Or pretty much things are clear? Okay, so that's great. Again, I think we will pretty much end the first part of this class, which is like continuous optimization. So I won't talk too much more on other techniques. I think this is like enough breadth of continuous optimization techniques, at least from a machine learning perspective, right? But also from an optimization perspective. I will though be setting up a homework, as I said, on continuous optimization maybe over the weekend, right? So expect to see it soon. It will be due like by the end of March, like the last week of March or something. And we will start with like submodel optimization from next time, right? So we will be first doing like just the basics of submodel optimization, and then we'll talk about like so we'll talk about submodel functions first and some intuitions, and then I'll talk about some optimization algorithms, right? So this will all be discrete algorithms, so we'll switch gears a little bit here. And I have like a rough outline on the GitHub page, right? It is of course subject to change because I'm still yet to finalize on the slides, but the plan will roughly be the same. Okay. Any other last questions on the course in general, on anything specific? Okay, awesome. Okay, great. So let's meet again next week. I hope all of you have finalized on your papers, right? So if you have not, please do. So I'll just quickly check this out. Also, I think by the end of next week, let us try to finalize on the projects. So please discuss with me if you have any questions on the projects. But let us try to finalize on the projects, right? So looks like okay. So it looks like most of the students have already chosen the finalize on the paper. So that's great. Is there anyone who has not yet? Okay, so that's fine. But I think not too many of you have started on the projects, right? Okay, so I don't think anyone like any of you have started on the project. So please try to finalize on the projects. Let us discuss this maybe next week, but I think in a week or two, let us try to finalize on the projects. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, sounds good. The project sheet should have 2 rows, I guess. Yes. So here there will be so again it will be like the person or the group. Okay, so actually there are some projects added here. So I think this is fine the way it is, right? So there's a person, and then there is the project title and like an abstract. So I think this is fine. Yeah. So please add your projects over here to this. Sounds good. All right. Take care, guys. See you next week.